and welcome to TRT World. I'm Jafar Hassan.
And I'm Amanda Walker. We are coming to you live from Washington, where we're witnessing one of the most dramatic comebacks in U.S. political history.
4 years after his controversial exit, Donald Trump is set to return to the White House. Millions of Americans have voted to give him a second chance, with many citing the economy and immigration as their top concerns.
This campaign has been marked by unprecedented twists: 2 assassination attempts on Trump, President Biden's unexpected exit from the race, and the ongoing fallout from Trump's refusal to accept the 2020 results.
And now he looks all set to make history as the first sitting president with a felony conviction after being found guilty of falsifying business records.
Polarizing yet resolute, Trump's path back to power has been nothing short of extraordinary. We have correspondents and guests from across the U.S. and around the world to give their insights on the implications of this historic election. First, let's get a roundup of it all from our correspondent, John Braid.
When supporters of Donald Trump rioted at the Capitol building on January the 6th, 2021, it seemed inconceivable that Trump could ever again be a candidate for the nation's highest office. It was his unfounded claim that the presidential election had been stolen that had encouraged them to march on Congress.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
But Donald Trump is the great survivor. Nothing derailed him from his 4-year campaign to return to the White House. Not even 4 criminal indictments. Not even becoming the first US president to be convicted of a felony. And not even being accused by nearly 24 women of sexual misconduct. Trump simply reframed the narrative. It was all a political witch hunt designed by his opponents to prevent him becoming president again. And Trump never lost the support of his legion of loyal followers, who willingly accepted his claim that every criticism of him by the media was fake news.
Take a look what happened.
When he escaped a would-be assassin's bullet in Pennsylvania, he garnered both sympathy and new supporters, including the world's richest man, Elon Musk, who poured tens of millions of dollars into his campaign. Most importantly, throughout the election campaign, it was clear that in terms of actual policies, Trump had the initiative. People trusted him on the biggest issue of all, the economy, saying they'd been better off during his presidency than under the Biden-Harris administration. His promise to crack down on illegal immigration also resonated. He blamed the 4 years of chaos at the southern border on the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Above all, he was able to reach out to ordinary voters in a way his rival couldn't.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good. And the Senate races in Montana, Nevada, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, were all won by the MAGA movement. They helped so much.
In the final analysis, Democrats perhaps underestimated Donald Trump's enduring appeal. They focused on his perceived character defects. But many voters appeared not to mind that Trump can be rude, bullying, authoritarian even. They decided that he was more likely to make their lives better than Kamala Harris, and more likely to make America great again.
The question now is whether over the next 4 years Donald Trump can deliver on his promises, or whether those who voted for him will ultimately be left with buyer's remorse.
For more on this, let's bring in TRT World's John Braid, who joins me live from Florida. John, just to pick up on what Donald Trump said in his victory speech, America has given Trump an unprecedented victory, not just in the presidential race, but also in Congress. He's right, is he not?
He absolutely is. I mean, if he can control the whole administration, if he's got a Republican Senate, as we know he has, if he can secure the House as well, or the Republicans can secure the House as well, he'll be able to implement his agenda because he's not likely to face a great deal of opposition from Republican lawmakers. He's got that party so firmly in his grip now that most lawmakers are wary of coming up against him. It's noticeable that of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach him, 8 of them are no longer on the scene. He is so powerful, and he is now in a position, if he wants to bring in some pretty extreme measures. I mean, during the campaign, he talked of using the army to deport the millions, as he described them, of illegal immigrants. He talked of sacking federal workers if they're not loyal to him. He's spoken about putting a very controversial figure in charge of the health service, RFK Jr., an anti-vaxxer. Of course, that all could just be talk, and some of these things will not be practical. But clearly, he is in a very powerful position, perhaps more powerful than he was in 2016, when the result was more of a surprise to him. We're told that this time his team are much clearer-eyed on who's going to be part of the administration and what that administration is going to do. Of course, he doesn't take over in the Oval Office until late January, so he's got more time to flesh out these plans. But certainly we're up in, I think, for another turbulent 4 years of White House coverage.
John, I'm interested in your perspective from what you're hearing from voters. We know that inflation, as everyone rushes to crystallize the reason that Trump won this election, inflation in the economy has been very much at the forefront of everyone's minds. Have you heard that from voters? Is that ultimately what was most important to them when they were heading into the ballot box?
Yes, very much so. And I think it was noticeable that it's not that Trump supporters don't recognize that he has certain failings as a person, that he can be this authoritarian figure. They accept that. Not all of them actually like him, but they just feel he's better for their futures. And certainly the economy was the theme that came up and again across America whenever we've been outside the bubble of Washington, D.C. And I think another thing to bear in mind is when Trump won in 2016, all the pundits agreed that he'd appealed to certain groups of people who felt left behind by globalization, the white working class men, for example, who also felt they're on the wrong side of the culture wars. And those issues have not been addressed in the past 8 years. If anything, economically, people feel a lot worse off. So the scene has still been ripe for Trump to attract those people again. And this time he's added more groups to his base. Latino men, for example, seem to have switched from Biden, from the Democrats, to Donald Trump. He's made inroads with black men as well. So this is a very powerful situation, a more powerful victory this time. And as we know, of course, he's even won the popular vote.
Okay, John, thank you very much. Now, of course, Jaffa, we know this was all really about 7 battleground states. Georgia was one of them. We can head there now to Martin Markovitz. Martin, what is the kind of consensus that's forming there the day after the big event?
Yes, well, it wasn't that big of a surprise. Trump was leading by 1 to 2% in most polls in the run-up to the election. But I think one of the biggest factors why he won here is because of the rural vote. If you look at the areas outside of the big city of Atlanta, they went overwhelmingly for the president-elect. And while the Atlanta suburbs have become more diverse, have more liberal people, Democratic people there, the turnout, although it was steady, was not as high as 4 years ago. Democrats were also calling on suburban women who were angered over the reversal of Roe v. Wade to come out in droves. We got to remember that in Georgia, abortion is severely restricted here. You have up to 6 weeks to get. Most women don't even know they're pregnant, as opposed to California, where it's still basically completely legal. But it seems that it did not mobilize the suburban women like they had hoped for. And then, of course, African American men. Although Harris won the majority, Trump made significant gains. And why? I think one of the things is that a lot of African American, a lot of people grew up with Donald Trump on the TV show The Apprentice. They like his kind of macho posturing, but also, of course, the economy. Economists say the United States has a great economy, it's growing, but for a lot of people, especially poorer people, it's not. The price of housing has skyrocketed, groceries have gone up, and also homelessness has expanded all over through the country. If you walk in the streets of many U.S. cities, you see people on the street, and a lot of people say it's because they've been forced out of their houses because the prices are too high. Also, another factor, I call it the Joe Rogan factor, that he's the most popular podcaster in the United States. Trump went on his show about a week ago, and Trump and Joe Rogan, actually, who was a traditional Democrat, supported Bernie Sanders, endorsed Donald Trump. And he has a significant white male audience, and Georgia has a huge, demographically has a big percentage of white men. So that could have been another factor. And then, of course, Trump made a coalition not just with conservative people, but with a lot of formerly progressive people. I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. These were people who supported the campaign of Bernie Sanders 4 years ago, a very progressive candidate. They feel that the Democratic Party has become too woke, too elitist, and they went and gravitated toward Trump, and that probably brought a whole range of other people to this new coalition. Back to you.
Right. Martin, let me ask you, what do you think has been the biggest contributor of Donald Trump's victory in Georgia? Which factor, in your view, has contributed the most for his victory?
I think the biggest factor, and what I've been hearing, is the evangelical Christian turnout, which, is dominant outside of the Atlanta area. I think they were galvanized that abortion has now become illegal countrywide, and they did not want it to come back. So thousands of people in that camp went to the polls overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. And it was a backlash. Like I said, the Democrats thought that would actually help them, the ruling against abortion, but it seems it went the other way. Back to you.
That's Martin Markovitz live for us from Georgia. Martin, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Frank Cucciardo, who joins us live from Pennsylvania. Frank, good to see you. Now, all eyes were on Pennsylvania, not just last night, but in the lead up to the elections. It was being said that whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the election, and this is exactly what we saw happen last night. Trump won Pennsylvania, and now he's all set to reoccupy the White House.
Yes, well, winning Pennsylvania was by the slimmest of margins. Let me give you some numbers. Donald J. Trump getting 50.70% of the votes. That translates to roughly 3,436,648 votes. To Kamala Harris's 48.35% of the vote. That translates into 3,277,439. A difference of just about only 160,000 votes between the two candidates here in Pennsylvania. And that's how close it was. Even the key Senate race was neck and neck, and it flipped. It went from the Democrats to the Republican, Dave McCormick. He has narrowly edged his incumbent Democrat candidate, Bob Casey, for the U.S. Senate race. So there you go. A senator from Pennsylvania has also been elected and gone to the Republican side. This has been an extraordinary political comeback for the Trump campaign. In Philadelphia here, where most of the votes have been counted, Trump received just over 20% of the vote, and Vice President Kamala Harris received the lion's share, a little bit more than 78% of the vote, but it was down by 3%. Compared to what President Joe Biden got here in 2020. So even her numbers were sliding in areas where she was expected to be popular. Back to you.
Frank, why do you think that was? I mean, they put in a lot of work, a lot of money in Pennsylvania, the Democrats. What went wrong for them?
I'm not quite sure if it's what went wrong for them as much as what Mr. Trump did to get votes he normally wouldn't get. He really focused hard on the rural areas. He went to places like Butler, Pennsylvania, which is, of course, a Republican stronghold several times, also the scene of his attempted assassination. And he went to all these other places. I mean, even doing things like putting on an apron and serving hamburgers, trying to appeal to the common blue-collar workers. Mr. Trump's campaign was specifically targeting the blue-collar workers after controversy during his campaign, where he actually told Elon Musk at one point that he didn't want to pay workers overtime. Of course, that may have lost him some union votes, but apparently that didn't seem to matter here. One of the big key issues here in Pennsylvania is the steel. U.S. Steel proposed merger with a Japanese steel company. Both candidates said they didn't want that merger to go through. So Mr. Trump did pick up some union votes there. Kamala Harris, she lost out in the places where she was trying to pick up votes that they normally wouldn't get in the rural areas of Pennsylvania. That remained conservative. That didn't change. And the Latino vote, well, that was another area that both thought they were going to get. In fact, the Harris campaign thought she really had it locked up. I mean, even in her last campaign stop with concert and Ricky Martin coming out and performing for her, people said, okay, she's going to get the lion's share of the Latino vote. Not so. Mr. Trump was targeting the Latino vote, and a lot of them started to shift back over into the Republican category and vote for Republican candidates. Back to you.
That's Frank Gucciardo live for us from Philadelphia. Frank, thank you very much indeed. And now let's cross over to New York City and bring in TRT World's Kubra Akkoch. Kubra, good to see you. So Donald Trump has also made significant gains across 5 major governmental districts in New York City. That's very surprising, is it not?
Exactly, Jafar. New York media outlets are already calling it one of the greatest comebacks in American history. Trump actually gained ground here in New York, which is a traditionally blue Democratic state. New York State actually has been voting Democrat since the Great Depression. And actually in the last 9 elections, the difference between Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate was around 20% margin. But this time around, we are looking at an outcome just above 10%. Trump actually got 44.2% of the votes as per AP, where Kamala Harris gained 55.8% of the votes. So this means Trump increased its percentage of voting here in New York by 7%, and this is huge. And people are saying Trump would never let go of New York, despite he knew that he has zero chance of winning in this election, the state in general. He still campaigned here. He held a rally in Bronx in May. Well, actually his supporters were cheering build the wall. He also held a rally in Long Island in September. And last but not least, of course, that very controversial Madison Square Garden rally was held in New York, where that controversial Puerto Rico joke happened. Many thought actually that was a big hit for Trump's campaign, that made Trump's campaign a lot more controversial. But quite interestingly, last night in front of the Trump Tower, where we are actually on the 5th Avenue, we saw Trump supporters cheering up for Trump's victory, holding American flags and along with Puerto Rico's flag. It was quite interesting scenes for me to see, because people thought the campaign got a hit by that joke, where actually it followed by President Biden's comment of Trump supporters, where he called garbage. So New York has been very important for Trump. Right now we are in front of Trump Tower, and people here lined up right now to come and take pictures in front of this building. And it's interesting for me, Trump is not even here. Why people who voted for Trump, and there are also some tourists as well, they came here, they're celebrating his victory in front of this building, because this building signifies his political and financial power. And New York is actually where Donald Trump has become Donald J. Trump. He turned into a celebrity, then a politician, of course, from a real estate guy in New York. So while he was holding those rallies during his campaign trail, he was saying he was winning in New York. Of course, he didn't mean most likely that he was winning the state because the statistics were out there. But still, if he meant by gaining his ground, increasing his percentage by 7%, he was quite right about that.
That's Kubra, coach. Oh, sorry about that, Amanda.
Thank you, Kubra. We're joined now by two guests. Let's discuss further. Todd Belt, who is the director of the Political Management Program at George Washington University, and Khaled El-Gindi, who is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you both for joining us. Todd, let me start with you. So we've had 10 years of Donald Trump now. So his kind of blunt force, do you think perhaps has lost some of its shock value, which is perhaps why people have been able to go straight to the issues like the economy and immigration?
Oh, absolutely not. I think Donald Trump's personality is very much part of what attracts people to him. They like him not in spite of what he says, but because of what he says. When we ask questions to people about what they like most about Donald Trump, one of the things they say is, because he says things I wish I could. So it's not that his personality is a bug, it's more of a feature for these people. And in an election like this one where it was very much dependent on turnout, there weren't a whole lot of people who were undecided despite what some of the polls said. This really helped him energize his base and get them out, and that is actually what really helped. And we see in the areas where he's done well in the past, he did even better this time around, and I think that's because of his personality, not in spite of it.
Todd, if I may add to one question about polls. I mean, yet again, Donald Trump has proven that polls are wrong. In the lead up to the election, most of the polls, in fact, all of them were showing a neck-and-neck race between Kamala Harris, but he has a significant lead over Harris, not just in electoral college, but also when it comes to the popular vote.
Right, well, we're going to have to wait on the polls. We are still counting votes in a lot of states, and we have to see exactly what the numbers are that come out. In 2016, there were 10 swing states and 20 estimates. There were 4 that were off. In 2020, people were saying the polls were really, really wrong again. There was only 1 out of 16 estimates that were wrong in the 8 swing states. So is it possible the polls were off again? It is, but we still need to wait until we get the final vote tallies so we can compare the final projections to those tallies and see if they are in fact outside the margin of error.
And Khaled, a lot of people are waking up this morning very, very worried, very concerned about the future of America, largely based on what Donald Trump has said during his campaign. He's praised strongman dictators. He said he'd use the military against political opponents, that he would prosecute political opponents. All of these things straight from his mouth that a lot of people have found acceptable and a lot of people have found terrifying and repugnant. How do they cope with this news this morning?
Well, it's going to be a long 4 years, for sure, for the anti-Trump camp in the United States. I think, you know, it's not just the issues that you pointed out. He's also talked about mass deportations. And, you know, shutting down university protests and all kinds of things that will affect millions of Americans.
Mass deportations, can that actually happen? Because the money that would take, the organization that would take, it would make it pretty unpopular once it starts moving. Do you think he's actually going to do this, or is it another war?
It could end up being another build the wall sort of situation, but he doesn't have to carry out mass deportations. He only has to take steps in that direction, and I think maintain the support from his base. That'll be harder to do since his party will control both houses of Congress. There's no question about that. But I think he could certainly he could continue without fulfilling all of those very extreme promises.
Right, Khaled, and what do you think this means for the Democrats? And we were talking this with John Brain earlier, our North America correspondent. Trump has not just won the presidency, his party is leading in Congress as well. There's a lot of rethinking for Democrats to do at this point. Where do you think they went wrong?
Oh, there's so many aspects of the Democratic strategy, both before and after Kamala Harris entered the race, that people can find fault with. I think it's clear there's going to have to be some serious soul searching inside the Democratic Party leadership. I think one area where there are a number of assumptions that are going to have to be revisited. It doesn't seem that very many lessons were learned from 2016, and they, in a lot of ways, kind of dusted off the same playbook that didn't work for Hillary Clinton again this time around. And to no one's surprise, it didn't work yet again. And in fact, it's been an even bigger failure. I think the Democrats have a hard time holding on to their own base. Republicans run toward their base, their core supporters. Democrats tend to run away from them. And I think that will be one of the key critiques leveled at the Democratic leadership, that they ran away from progressive, they ran away from minority constituencies that Trump was able to cannibalize.
And Todd, in 2016, Trump was a political rookie. He knows the system now. He's going to go in with loyalists across the board. Are you worried? Should people be worried about Trump unchecked?
Well, you're absolutely right. In terms of 2016, he promised us he would hire all the best people. Well, they're all gone now. They've all left the administration and written tell-all books about what it's like to work with Donald Trump. So he's going to surround himself with sycophants, with people who are going to empower him. And that, given the fact that our Supreme Court in Trump versus U.S. decided that all constitutional acts have immunity and that all official acts have a presumption of immunity, mean that Donald Trump is going to have a lot more of an ability to use executive power and executive orders, which is what he likes to do more than work with Congress. Even if it is going to be his own party, he still sees Congress as messy, and he doesn't like dealing with them. He's always given that to other aspects of his administration.
Todd, what kind of roles are we looking for people like Jared Kushner and Elon Musk?
Well, Jared Kushner is going to be interesting. Jared Kushner was, of course, a very big part of the first Trump administration, but he's been backing away from it, and Ivanka has been backing away from it too. So I don't see him going in and her staying out. I think they're a bit of a pair. But you see somebody like Elon Musk, and we've heard some real vague things about he's going to make America more competitive and he's going to streamline efficiencies. That sounds to me sort of like what Vice President Gore had in the 1990s, which was reinventing government, perhaps something like that. And then RFK Jr. as perhaps health and human services. That might be something that we'll see there. But we're going to get more people who are not as experienced in these high-level roles in the second Trump administration.
And Khaled, we know that there was a big consequential Arab American movement against Harris. Are they going to be better off under Trump?
They probably will not be better off under Trump. Maybe some segments might be. I mean, particularly small business owners or those who are primarily sort of bought into the culture war issues and had much narrower agendas. But as a whole, I think Arab American and Muslim American communities are going to be on the receiving end of a lot of the very negative policies that this administration and Republican Congress are going to be putting forward, including imprisoning potentially many of their children on college campuses across the country, defunding or decertifying various NGOs that are deemed to be overly critical of Israel or overly critical or un-American. I mean, I think we're likely to see a kind of new McCarthyism with the full support of both the White House and Congress.
I mean, when you look at the wider Muslim vote in the country, it seems to me this time around the Muslims of the United States have sent a very strong message to the Democrats: do not take our vote for granted. Take Dearborn, for example.
Right.
Donald Trump has won Dearborn, which has one of the highest concentrations of Muslims anywhere in the U.S. What do you think this tells us?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think it's there was so much anger and so much grief in the Arab American and Muslim communities. The Biden-Harris administration did not fully appreciate it. They didn't really do much to try and allay those anxieties, those fears. People were very optimistic that Kamala Harris would try to distance herself from Biden's disastrous Gaza policy, but she didn't. She remained loyal, and I think that's part of the price that they're now paying. Is they lost, they alienated core segments of the community that had gone for Biden overwhelmingly just 4 years ago.
Right. Khalid, Todd, stay with us. Let's cross over to occupied East Jerusalem and bring in TRT World's Mohammed Al-Qasim. Now, Qasim, I've watched your report, the one you did on the perception among Palestinians about what's happening here in the United States when it comes to the presidential elections. Now, it seems Donald Trump is the projected winner. Tell me, what are Palestinians thinking about this?
Well, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas congratulated President-elect Donald Trump earlier in the day, as well as urging him to act for peace. The same sentiment came from Hamas leaders who urged President-elect Donald Trump to act for peace. But Palestinians in general are concerned. They're dismayed. They're unsure which Donald Trump to expect. Is he the first Donald Trump that was president back in 2016, the one who recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and also worked to undermine the Palestinian cause by going into the Abrahamic Accords with Gulf states and pushing the Palestinian cause to the back burner? Is he the same one who cut off funds for UNRWA, for the Palestinian refugees? Or is he someone else who could maybe change direction, work for trying to get real peace between Palestinians and Israelis, push for the two-state solution, does not give sovereignty to illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank like he did back in 2016 when he gave sovereignty of the occupied Golan Heights to Israel? That's why it's understandable to understand the concern and dismay of the Palestinian people. They are waiting to see what kind of efforts and plans President-elect is going to have for them, as well as for ending the war in the Gaza Strip. They're hoping that this time around, it's going to be a different President Trump than he was back in 2016.
Now, Qasim, when it comes to Palestinian, what's the perception among Palestinians about the defeat that Democrats have faced here in the United States?
Well, Palestinians look at American politics and Democratic presidents or Republican presidents as one of the same. They don't see much difference when it comes in terms of policies from U.S. administration, successive U.S. administrations when it comes to the Palestinian issue. They know that the U.S. will give unflinching, unequivocal, unconditional support for Israel, and they've experienced President Biden, who is a Democrat. He is someone who pushes for the traditional policies of the U.S., the two-state solution, which he has really done nothing there. And also they say that he speaks about sympathizing with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip on one hand, but at the same time he continues to provide military aid to Israel with weapons that are used to kill Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. So it's, as far as they're concerned, there is no difference to an American Democratic president or a Republican president. They're one of the same, and that's why they're not really sad to see President Biden out of office, or even Kamala Harris losing the presidency, because they knew that Vice President Harris will be just a continuation of the Biden administration, which has failed in reining in Israeli policies in the Gaza Strip and ending the war in Gaza. They haven't really, according to the Palestinians, that the Biden administration didn't really exert enough pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government to end the war in Gaza, to reach a ceasefire there. And they didn't expect really much from the Democratic nominee, Harris, and her loss to them is really not much or nothing to cry about, but they're a little bit concerned about incoming President Trump for the reasons I mentioned. But at the same time, they don't see much difference between a Democratic president or a Republican one. Back to you.
That's Mohammed Al-Qasim live for us from occupied West Bank. Qasim, thank you very much indeed. Amanda.
Well, joining us on our panel now is Tim Constantine, who is the host of TRT World's Capitol Hill show. Tim, I want to put a question to you that I put to Todd earlier. 10 years of Trump. We know his style now. It is shock value. But do you think that kind of shock value has decreased among people? Have we gotten used to it, which allows more people to hold their noses and vote for him on issues like immigration, like the economy?
I don't think necessarily everyone that voted him held their nose. I think there are people
Not everyone did. He got more people.
I think there are people that like Donald Trump. I think there's a lot. I think there's tens of millions of Americans that like Donald Trump. And the assumption and the comment by the media that we had to hold our nose to vote for him is not an accurate one. So
no,
to
I appreciate that.
answer
With the
your
bulk
question,
of his
that's
voters.
not accurate.
I'm talking about the extra people that voted for him that allowed him to win.
Sure, I think there's some who saw, and I would say, you know, authenticity is a word that's thrown around, very trendy right now, but I think there's some question as to the authenticity of who Kamala Harris is. And the authenticity of Donald Trump, even if you don't like him, you know exactly who he is. And you watched him when he went in McDonald's, for example, and he was comfortable and at ease and laughing and talking to people and joking, and never underestimate that. They used to call it the beer factor in America. Which candidate would you rather sit down and talk with over a beer? And when George W. Bush beat Al Gore, a lot of people thought Al Gore was probably a smarter guy, but they liked George Bush better. I'm not saying they liked Trump better, but he was more relatable and more authentic.
I think this financial backing point is a valid one. Let me put this to you, Todd. Of course, Kamala Harris put tens of millions of dollars more than Donald Trump when it comes to political campaigning. Despite the financial backing, polls in the United States in the lead up to the election were showing both candidates neck and neck. And now we have the results, the projected winner. So what do you think this tells us about her popularity within the Democratic Party, within the Democrats across the U.S.?
Well, it shows you just how hard it is to mount an entire presidential campaign in 107 days. Let's remember that she didn't have an opportunity to run in the primaries, where she might have been able to create some of her own messaging and sharpen some of those policies and try to appeal to people and find her strengths and introduce herself to people and gain some more of that.
So is this something that she's going to use as an excuse when she concedes defeat, if she does, which she might do today if she speaks to the American public?
I think she might talk about how difficult it was to run
But I mean,
a
she had the
campaign.
opportunity, because she was brought into this position because of the circumstances. She could have chosen to opt out of it.
She could have, certainly. But there's also the fact that, you know, we had two campaigns that were pretty devoid of issues other than, you know, immigration on Trump's side. We had candidates who put together some real hasty economic plans at the very end of the campaign and then had a lot of trouble getting those out. I was at Kamala Harris's rally over here just last week, her closing rally. Half of that speech was about the economy, but you know what got covered? Joe Biden's comment about garbage. And so, you know, that message just wasn't getting through. She was having trouble getting that through. Whether that was a good message and would have resonated with voters is another question entirely, and I can see that it may not have. But it's difficult to run such a quick campaign.
Carlo, do you think if Joe Biden had dropped out sooner, things would have been different?
It might have been. But I think also she, for the 107 days that she was in the race, she couldn't step out of the shadow of Joe Biden. And she could not distance herself from policies that were sort of a drag on the Democratic Party and on her campaign. Part of that was due to the fact that she's a sitting vice president. She can't contradict her boss. But also I think it's a misjudgment on her part. I think one of many. I think she was listening to advisors who were telling her, you know, look, we got a great ground game in these different states and we have the funds and you just have to stick with the standard Democratic playbook and we'll win. That standard Democratic playbook has not worked in many years.
So what should they have done differently?
Well, I mean, I think they should have listened more to their base. There were constituencies in the Democratic Party umbrella that were yelling and screaming and saying, you know, see us, hear us. And she didn't. Instead, she ran toward the center and the right, and you know, talking about her Glock, and talking and campaigning with the Cheneys. That's not, that might appeal to some tiny segment of suburbia, but it did not appeal, and I think ended up alienating her core base.
Right. I want to bring in Tim here. Tim, I want to talk about Joe Biden. To what extent do you think Joe Biden is to be blamed for Kamala's defeat?
I think, the fact that you have a president and a presidency that was not popular and was not successful, that certainly harms the candidate who is aligned with that administration. I would just take literally the exact opposite opinion here as far as if she had more time, would she have done better? And I think the answer is no. What you saw was when Kamala Harris came out of the blocks, she instantly went to an 8-point lead. People were looking for an alternative. They were looking for an alternative to Joe Biden and to Donald Trump. They saw someone younger, someone with charm, someone with charisma, and they thought, oh, this might be it. And she was up by 8 points nationally, and then the more people saw her and the more people heard her, her numbers went down and went down and went down. I believe this is one of those where Donald Trump ran through the tape at the end of this race, pulling away from the pack. If this went another week, he would have won by more. If it went another 2 weeks, he would have won by even more. Kamala Harris' inability to define who she was and what she was, and the fact that she did nothing with the wall, for example, for 4 years, and now says, no, really, I'm tracking on that wall, I'm suddenly in favor of the wall, and any number of other issues similarly. She was a weaker candidate the longer she went there. And that's Kamala Harris, because in 2019, she announced she was running for president to great fanfare against Joe Biden and other Democrats. And her very first week, she raised $42 million, which was at that time a record. And they touted that, oh my gosh, look, she's moved way up in the polls, she raised all this money. And 100 days later, she was out of the race. And so now, we were, what was it, 107 days later, she lost the race. That should not be shocking, and that is the danger you mentioned earlier of not having a candidate go through the primary process.
Right, all right. Gentlemen, stay with us. Of course, we are seeing a lot of reaction pouring in from different parts of the world. Our correspondent Joel Flynn has filed a report on the reaction from Europe. Have a listen.
He's claimed victory. The question next is, what does this historic comeback mean for America's allies? How will the new US administration impact things across the pond? As Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House, Europe now waits to see how he'll handle negotiations with NATO, the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. Presidents and prime ministers have rushed to congratulate him across the continent, including here in London, where the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has called for a renewal of the special relationship.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by congratulating President-elect Trump on his historic election victory. As the closest of allies, the UK and US will continue to work together to protect our shared values of freedom and democracy. And having had dinner with President-elect Trump just a few weeks ago, I look forward to working with him in the years to come.
NATO allies have moved quickly to reiterate close bonds formed over time, and yet uncertainty.
Many things will certainly be different under a government led by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has always made that clear publicly. Our messages are clear. Firstly, Germany will remain a reliable transatlantic partner. We are aware of the contributions we make to this partnership and will continue to make in the future. This also applies with regard to the threat that all NATO allies believe Russia poses to the security in the Euro-Atlantic area.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky took to the social media platform X, calling for continued US support as Trump prepares for a second term in office. But in what form could that come? Trump boasted he'd end the war between Russia and Ukraine within 24 hours if elected, and signalled he could pull the plug on Ukrainian funding in order to force a negotiated settlement. And then there are economic concerns. Trump warned shortly before his election victory that the EU would have to pay a big price for not buying enough American exports. Plans are now being drawn up to appease his proposed 10% tariffs. As a new dawn is ushered in, Europe is preparing to chart a new course with America, and some choppy waters lie ahead. James Lewis, TRT World.
All right, Amanda, so
James Lewis from London there. Let's cross live now to Joel Flynn, who's in Kyiv. Obviously, Ukraine is a huge issue, something that was at the forefront of a lot of people's minds when it comes to US foreign policy. We know Donald Trump has said that on his watch, no wars, Joel. What's the reaction there in Ukraine to his victory?
Well, as you heard in James's report, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, welcomed Donald Trump's re-election. He said that strength was the cause and the reason to seek a just peace in Ukraine. We have heard exclusively from a senior Ukrainian government source today here in Kyiv that the Ukrainians are prepared to enter negotiations over peace with Russia for the first time, the understanding that Russia could potentially occupy the grounds in Ukraine that it currently holds. This is brand new information. The Ukrainians had previously not given any indication that they would be willing to enter into negotiations under that pretext. But it does come with additional demands. They want to have at least 50 years of security guaranteed by the Russians. It wouldn't necessarily need to be guaranteed by NATO, we understand as well. But nonetheless, this is something that we know that Donald Trump had said that he would instigate. What we do believe at the moment is that he hasn't had any interference in this whatsoever. This has come from the Ukrainians themselves. Nonetheless, this will be something that Trump will be able to trumpet as a victory for his policies and certainly an early one to bring to the table.
Is there a concern in Ukraine that they are going to lose US support, though?
They will need US support as far as the discussions are concerned. We know as far as the American position is concerned, the opinions of most of the American lawmakers in Congress has been that the financial commitments they have been making to the Ukrainians have been excessive. Trump himself earlier this year called Zelensky the greatest salesman in history. He said that every time he comes to Washington, he walks away with $60 billion. That is, of course, a reference to the financial aid package that was passed by Congress earlier this year. The Ukrainians, though, have said that they don't get enough financing, that they need more help. Zelensky has said that even the help that they have been pledged doesn't always translate to differences on the ground, and the Ukrainians need everything. They need ammunition, they need weaponry, they also need people, and currently they are struggling on that front as well. The Russians have been making big progress in the east, taking village after village and approaching westwards to key strategic towns. The Ukrainians at the moment now seem to acknowledge that the situation is untenable, that with a new United States president that looks to end the war, the foreign policy situation has fundamentally shifted. That seems why they are willing to enter negotiations. That seems to be a game changer for them, and that could potentially mean peace and the end of this nearly 3 years of war.
Thank you, Joel.
That's Joel Flynn live for us from Kyiv. Joel, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in TRT World's Dasha Chernyshova now. She joins us live from Moscow. Dasha, good to see you. Now, Donald Trump has boasted about his relationship with President Putin not once, but on multiple occasions. He says that he knows Putin better than anyone else, and the war in Ukraine wouldn't have happened if he were the president. Tell me, what is the reaction in Russia?
Well, in Russia, we have heard the officials being rather quiet when it comes to giving any sort of reaction to the U.S. election. And we've heard them being quite restrained, saying that they did not have any sort of illusions when it comes to the victory of Donald Trump in this presidential campaign. They have said that there is the bipartisan consensus in the United States, which is, regardless of who is winning the election, driving the political elites in Washington to take the what is seen in Russia as the anti-Russian rhetoric attempts to contain Russia and those Russophobic stance as well. So in Russia, they say they are willing to work with any president who is elected in the United States. However, what Moscow is saying, it will be strongly standing to defend its own national interest. And with regard to that, you have to keep in mind that Russia does have its own concerns. And even though Donald Trump has been previously saying that he does have good personal relationship with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, it is unclear whether these demands and these concerns could actually be met. And unlike it was in 2016, it does seem that the Russian officials are very toning down any sort of comments, any sort of rhetoric. They are also saying that they are willing to see the real concrete steps of the new president when he is inaugurated, because they also take the note that the campaign slogans are very different from the concrete actions taken when the president is in the Oval Office.
That's Dasha Chernyshova live for us from Moscow. Dasha, thank you very much indeed. There's certainly a lot to talk about here, Amanda, especially when it comes to foreign policy. How is it going to change under Donald Trump when he reoccupies the White House? Of course, many questions remains unanswered when it comes to that.
If he's anything, he's unpredictable. I think we can perhaps all agree on that. Todd, I want to ask you about the fact that he is the first convicted felon to win an election. He is actually awaiting sentencing, technically, at the same time that he will be doing a presidential transition. How is all that going to play out?
Well, it's a distraction. I mean, obviously, he can't pardon himself because those were state-level crimes that he was convicted of. But obviously, he's going to be putting some people into the Justice Department who will do the things that he wants, which is, number one, fire Jack Smith, which is what he wants to do on day one, and populate it with people who will be loyalists. The other issues, I think, pretty much go away, the other legal issues, because many of them are federal cases. And I think that the transition team is really what matters. What most people don't understand about the presidency is that there are about 5,000 jobs that are filled by the president, about 1,000 of which require Senate confirmation, which helps him to have that Senate to confirm those people that might be considered under normal circumstances not as qualified.
Okay, now I'm going to ask each of you this question, and because this is something that was raised by one of my good friends this morning when him and I were talking. He asked me this question, knowing that I've been covering the elections here for the past one month. Jaffer, is this the best America could do? Tim?
No, and this is, I've said this, what's funny is the last 3 elections, I've said this, we're a country of 330 million people. And these two, I said it during the Clinton and Trump race, I said it during the Biden and Trump race, and I said it this year, 330 million people, and this is the best we can do. But I will tell you, it's a rough sport, the sport of politics. And we talk about those court cases, and do we really believe that there were 4 different states, Florida, D.C., Georgia, New York, that there were cases ranging from 30 years ago to 8 years ago to 2 years ago, and that they were on 3 different levels, local, state, and federal. But by an amazing coincidence, they all came to court the year of an election? No, it's a dirty, nasty, rough sport. Yeah. If Donald Trump wasn't running for president, those wouldn't have come again. So, you know, you look at that and you think, why do people not run? That's part of the answer.
Okay. Todd?
Is this the best we can do? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no, we can do much better. And there are incentive structures in terms of fundraising, in terms of having national appeal, in terms of being able to hire the best candidates. If you look in 2020, when Joe Biden was thinking about running for president, and then that was when Kamala Harris announced she was going to run at first, the best political consultants in this town were waiting to see if Biden was going to get in because they knew that he could raise the most money. This is a professional, it's not just a contact sport, it is a profession as well.
And Khaled, when you look at the rest of the world, and I think similarly, I have friends and family who are looking from the outside in and saying, what's going on, guys? What is happening in America? Yet you have those supporters who are utterly loyal and devoted to Donald Trump, who believe that he represents them. How do you begin to explain those wildly divergent views?
Well, the people who are most enthusiastic about Donald Trump aren't particularly concerned about the rest of the world. They're concerned about what happens in the United States, right? That's why their slogan is America First. And so that's a secondary consideration. But if I could, on this question of our political system and whether it produces the best and brightest, it does not, obviously. The incentive structure is such that you know, we don't elect our presidents directly. Money plays an outsized role. Someone like Donald Trump, in an environment where you require coalition building, I mean, our two-party duopoly does not allow for, I think, a a Donald Trump type character to emerge. So there are lots of structural factors, I think, that relate directly, that pertain to the idiosyncrasies of American politics that allow us to have someone like Donald Trump.
All right.
Well, thank you all. We're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Khaled. Really interesting conversation.
And thanks for watching. The news continues here on TRT World. I'm Jafar Hasnan.
I'm Amanda Walker. Thanks for watching.